الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم أرنا حقائق الأشياء كما هي ربنا زدنا علما وعملا وإخلاصا يا رب العالمين. اللهم انصر أولياءك في غزة وفي فلسطين كلها وفي لبنان وفي اليمن وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم انصرهم على عدوك وعدوهم إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في غزة وفي الضفة وفي فلسطين كلها. اللهم فرج عنا وعن إخواننا في غزة وفي فلسطين كلها وفي لبنان وفي اليمن وفي السودان وفي مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. اللهم نفس كربنا وكربهم وثبت أقدامنا وأقدامهم والطف بنا وبهم يا أرحم الراحمين يا رب العالمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى وسلم على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأزواجه وذريته أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. Okay. So, Whitehead. So Whitehead was born in 1861 and 1947 is his death. English mathematician, logician, philosopher of science and metaphysician, educated first at Sherborne School in Dorsetshire, and then at Trinity College, Cambridge. Whitehead emerged as a first-class mathematician with a rich general background. I don't know what you mean by rich general background in mathematics or generally. In 1885, became a fellow of Trinity College, remained there in a teaching role until 1910. That's 24 years. In the early 1890s, Bertrand Russell entered Trinity College as a student in mathematics. By the beginning of the new century, Russell had become not only a student and a friend, but a colleague of Whitehead's Trinity College. Each had written a first book on algebra. Whitehead's a treatise on universal algebra won him election to Royal Society in 1903. When they discovered that their projected second books largely overlapped, they undertook a collaboration on a volume that they estimated would take about a year to write. In fact, it was a decade later that the 3 volumes of their groundbreaking Principia Mathematica appeared. I don't know in what sense they are groundbreaking, but launching symbolic logic in its modern form. Well, those might have been involved. In the second decade of the 20th century, Whitehead and Russell. In the second decade of the 20th century, Whitehead and Russell drifted apart. Their responses to World War I differed radically, and their intellectual interests and orientations diverged. Whitehead's London period, 1910 to 24, is often viewed as the second phase of a 3-phase career. His association with the University of London involved him in practical issues affecting the character of working-class education. For a decade, 1914-24, Whitehead had a professorship in the Imperial College of Science and Technology, and also served as Dean of the Faculty of Science in the university, as the chair of the academic council which manage educational affairs in London, and as chair of the council that manage Goldsmiths College. His aims of education is a collection of essays largely growing out of reflection on the experiences of these years. Intellectually, Whitehead's interests were more towards issues of the philosophy of science, issues in philosophy of science. I guess he or she means in this period. In the years 1919 to 22, he published an inquiry concerning the principles of natural knowledge, the concept of knowledge, and the principle of relativity. The third led to his later 1931 election as a Fellow of the British Academy. In 1924, and that's the third phase, at the age of 63, Whitehead made a dramatic move, both geographically and intellectually, to launch this third phase of his career. Never having formally studied philosophy in his life, he agreed to become professor of philosophy at Harvard University, a position he held until retirement in 1937. The accompanying intellectual shift was a move from the philosophy of science to metaphysics. The earlier investigation had assumed the self-containedness of nature. Nature is self-containedness of nature. Nature is self-contained and closed. Nature is closed to mind. Mind has no access to nature as such. Philosophy of nature examines nature at the level of abstraction entailed by this assumption. So the nature we call nature is abstraction to which we can access, but nature as a totality or as a whole or as an organic whole, I guess you can't access it according to his view at the time. Whitehead had come to regard philosophy as the critic of abstractions, a notion introduced in his book Science in the Modern World. This book traced the intertwined emergence of Newtonian science and philosophical presuppositions, and it noted that with the development of theory of relativity in the 20th century, scientific understanding had left behind the Newtonian conceptuality that had generated the still dominant philosophical assumption, and that those philosophical assumptions considered in themselves had become inadequate to explicate our full concrete experience. This view that moved from Newton's notion of science to relativity of Einstein was some revolutionary move in the sense that it changed the conception of science as such. And this underlies what Alam Iqbal says in Reconstruction as well, for example, reconstruction of religious thought in Islam. But I think this view is largely outdated today. I think there are much more continuity between Newtonian physics and Einstein's view of physics and science in general. Philosophy as the critic of abstractions must recognize the limitations of a stance that assumes that nature is closed to mind, and must push deeper beyond such an abstraction to create a scheme of ideas more in harmony with scientific developments and able to do justice to human being as part of nature. Um, I guess because his background is in mathematics, which is abstraction in itself, and never actually studies the experimental physics, for example. Then it's so did so it is understandable that his view of science as abstraction, that he adopts this view, and why this view is slightly partial view, at least. It's not a full picture of how science works. Science and Modern World merely outlines what such philosophy might be, his book. In 1929, Whitehead published his magnum opus, Process and Reality. That's after he moved to America. And that's the book which Allah Iqbal had some influence on what Allah Iqbal says in Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, for example. In this volume, subtitled An Essay in Cosmology, his metaphysical understanding is given its final form. It is customary to regard the book as a central document of what has become known as process philosophy. Though Whitehead himself frequently spoke of his system of ideas as philosophy of organism. Hmm. Okay, so this is process of reality. Process and reality begins with a sentence that sheds a great deal of light upon Whitehead's metaphysical orientation. These lectures, he said, these lectures are based upon our recurrence to that phase of philosophical thought which began with Descartes and ended with Hume. Cartesian philosophy. Descartes adapting the classical notion of substance to his own purposes. Classical mean Greek and yes, Roman. Classical notions of substance, that is the Aristotelian conception of substance, and substance is important in Descartes. He talked about two substance, matter and mind, but in fact, according to his definition, the real substance is only God. The idea which was further developed by Spinoza, for example. Descartes adapting the classical notion of substance to his own purposes begins a phase of philosophical thought by assuming that there are two utterly different kinds of substance, mind and matter. Although it should be remembered that for him, substance in the genuine sense is only God. And I guess God is neither mind nor matter. I don't know, or maybe either cosmic mind, each requiring nothing but itself in order to exist. That's not literally true because both require God in a way. In Descartes' system, anyway. This assumption launches the reign of epistemology within philosophy. If knowing begins with the experiencing of a mental substance capable of existing by itself and cut off from everything external to it, then the philosophical challenge is to try to justify the claim to establish contact with the reality external to it. That's true, but as a fact of the matter, we don't know any mental substance as such, because as us human beings, we have a mind, but that mind is within a body, or at least connected to the body. So the experience is not just mental, experience of a mental substance, but even in Descartes, for experience of a human being. That's why senses come in, and he has to show the house. We have to move over beyond senses, even though we must start with senses, to grasp what is permanent, in, which is indicated by senses but never fully um, fully revealed by senses, because senses don't have full grasp of reality on their own anyway. So what I want to say is that it's not entirely true that the reign of Andrew begins with the experiencing of mental substance capable of existing by itself and cut. It might be capable of existing by itself, cut off from everything external, but it is not cut off from everything external, because it actually is connected to, if not situated in, our body. And whatever it experiences in combination with our body, even though it can distance itself from that body. It cannot detach or totally detach from it. So in that sense, it's not correct to say that experience is the experience of mind alone, cut off from everything, capable of existence itself and cut off from everything external. Then the philosophical challenge is to try to justify the claim, to establish contact with a reality external to it. So if the matter and mind are totally distinct, then how they interact is a fundamental question for a Cartesian epistemology, no doubt about it. But obviously, that interaction itself is never doubted. What you need is a justification or of how it happens. And obviously, Kant has one version, and then other Cartesians like Leibniz has, and to a certain extent, empiricist Cartesian have other versions. And the phrase "and ended with Hume" expresses Whitehead's conviction that Hume, and more elegantly, he notes Santayana, the American philosopher, showed that if one begins with Descartes' metaphysical assumption, skepticism is inevitable. I don't think you have to start with Descartes. And one of the reasons for Descartes was to actually overcome skepticism by radicalizing it in the thought experience. What was I going to say? So I don't think if one begins with Descartes' metaphysical assumption, skepticism is inevitable. But that doesn't mean that you can avoid skepticism if you become non-Cartesian. I mean, if you don't want to be skeptical, that doesn't mean that a skeptical question is being overcome. I mean, that will remain there. You don't have to be a Cartesian to. In fact, the whole motive of Descartes took skepticism seriously or not, but I think his problem was he wanted a sort of certainty in this world which probably is not there. He wanted absolute certainty of the starting point at least, which probably is not there. So to establish that certainty, in a sense, artificially radicalized skepticism. So in a sense, Descartes is the, I think, opposite of skeptic. He doesn't really have any skeptic born in it, but he did take skepticism seriously and radicalized it in a way in which it seems even ridiculous, and then shows that how he can even overcome that ridiculously radical skepticism. So if he can overcome that, then minor versions of, or much weaker versions of skepticism can be overcome even more easily. So, but we should say that skepticism is always there if you want to tackle it as part of our epistemic apparatus and the way we know the world. So there's no way to avoid it or fully banish it from epistemology. Contemporary philosophers have talked about the end of philosophy. From Whitehead, etc. Okay, let's stop here and we'll continue from here next time, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصل وسلم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم.